Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome. When we released a couple weeks ago, we were in this studio and we released the most recent edition of Focus on Finance. We had hoped that the government would actually address some of the serious questions we raised. Sadly, but not surprisingly, the Liberals have failed to do that. So here we are today to present to you Focus on Finance 2. A look into Ontario's finances. It puts our finances under a microscope, and as you'll see, it reveals several flaws which are causing the, quote, crowding out of essential services, as the Auditor General puts it. Experts continue to express skepticism about the Liberal claim they will balance the budget by 2017-18. And, as this chart shows, they would have to completely change course to achieve that, something that all of the experts say is not happening. And as you can see, while we were on an upward trend, under Kathleen Wynne, we have fallen miserably. We fell from a deficit of $9.2 billion down to $10.5 billion, down to $10.9 billion this year. And as you can see, you would have to have a remarkable turn in philosophy in order to be able to get to balance by 2017-18. Moody's, the debt rating agency, changed their outlook from stable to negative. Fitch downgraded our credit rating to AA-, saying, quote, budget options are likely to prove more limited given the extent of actions taken to date and the use of one-time actions, that's asset sales, to achieve targets, quote. Maclean's last year called their 2014 budget a unicorn budget. The Conference Board of Canada said Ontario can't meet its pledge to balance the books by 2017-18 without spending cuts or tax hikes. The Ontario Chamber of Commerce says, quote, we're likely to reach a state of crisis unless the province cuts spending and changes the way it does business. Canadian Federation of Independent Business declared, quote, 97% of small businesses are concerned about the state of Ontario's economy, with 67% very concerned. Again, here's why all this focus on debt and deficit is so important. The Auditor General said, quote, Ontario's debt continues to grow faster than the province's economy, which could have negative implications for the province's finances. Her biggest concern was, as mentioned, quote, the crowding out of other spending. We now have less money for the things our citizens expect from their province. And we're seeing it happen right now, right here as we speak. Hospitals right across the province are firing nurses and other frontline workers. Universities are firing professors. Seniors are seeing physio, cataract surgeries, and diabetes testing strips all being cut. The expediting of school closures puts teachers out of work. The Liberals have done nothing to halt their spending addiction. We now have proceeds from one-time asset sales going to balance the budget. This amounts to burning the furniture to heat the house, and we ask, what are they going to sell next year? Yes, these one-time sales make the deficit numbers appear lower, but they've done nothing to fix the core problem, and that is that we have created a structural deficit. Their borrowing is for operating expenses, and you'll see that outlined in Focus on Finance 2, where it illustrates very clearly that their money is being used to fund operating expenses. The Canadian Forum for Policy Research confirms this with their bold statement, quote, Ontario is plagued with a structural deficit. This is backed up by other people, including the respected economists such as Jack Mintz. So unless this government is ready to tackle its spending, they cannot balance their budget. Under Kathleen Wynne, this government added $4 billion in new spending in their first year, $5.6 billion last year. Together, these numbers represent nearly 90% of the total deficit figure for 2014-15. We need to see this government do as the experts from the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, Moody's, Fitch, the Auditor General, and others have told them to do, and that is to significantly change course. Today, our interim leader, Jim Wilson, will be presenting an Opposition Day motion. It includes the 5 budget asks that we have made in the legislature so far, and that is not pursuing the pension tax, not adopting the carbon tax, streamlining home care, reducing energy prices, and my budget ask, which is for a serious, credible, and detailed plan to balance the budget by 2017-18. Thank you.
Vic, what do you think the size of the debt? I mean, the auditors already warned it could, be 3.25 by 17-18, even if they get to balance. What are you looking at now when we saw the deficit go up and up in each of the last couple of years? I mean, are we going to push through the $300 billion barrier?
Oh, easily, because even though the deficit last year was $10.9 billion, we actually added $20 billion to our debt. And that is because the borrowing that we do for infrastructure is added at the end. And that rule changed about a dozen years ago. Whereas before your infrastructure was included in your deficit, now it's pulled out separately. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's the way businesses do accounting. But what happens is only the mortgage on that money, if you will, is added into deficit. So our borrowing was actually $20 billion last year. You'll see that in the budget when it comes out tomorrow. So yes, we're gonna far surpass $300 billion.
How would you balance the books?
Number one, stop the new spending. We've seen that. As I mentioned earlier, just in the last 2 years, $4 billion in new spending and $5.6 billion. That's almost $10 billion in new spending. Had we just not added the new spending, we'd have almost seen a balanced budget. But this government has this addiction to spend. Stop the new spending. That's a good start.
So that would mean like putting off, say, like transit construction, some of that stuff for a couple of years, just to get our fiscal house in order first before we go ahead with those kinds of things?
No, those are in the budget. Those items are already in the budget. They've been in the budget for years. They aren't what popped the spending up, But also, don't be lured by this discussion on infrastructure spending. It's not new. It's been in the budget. It's been accounted for in the budget. Think about it last year when they presented the budget. They talked about the $29 billion in infrastructure spending. It was already in the budget, accounted for in terms of revenue and in terms of expenses, but it didn't include having to sell hydro and using that $4 billion. That's new. We're still spending the same money on, now they've said they're going to bump up the infrastructure, but not to the value of what we're selling hydro for.
So what the new spending from the last couple of years that you say they shouldn't have done, what did that pay for? What are like the sort of the specific programs you say they shouldn't have, have put that new money into?
Well, to sound like an old saw for a moment, think about $410 million on the Mars bailout, things like that, where money has been spent. These are the kinds of things when you've got a corporate welfare program. When you're forced to start paying businesses to come to your province instead of fixing the core problems. Again, it's an integrated plan. You need to correct the skyrocketing energy prices. So we've got the highest energy prices in North America. We've got the highest payroll taxes in Canada. These are the deterrents. You've got a government that's in constant deficit. Businesses are spooked by governments who are in deficit. They like to go to a solid place. So we only have to pay these businesses to come because we can't seem to fix the core problems. If you fix those problems, you wouldn't need to spend that $2.5 billion to lure businesses into your own province.
Is that sort of the primary place? Do you think that they're wasting money and adding to the deficit?
Those are several of them. Those are some of the main ones.
Vic, what do you make of Ed Clark's about face on an IPO for Hydro One? I mean, why do you think that happened?
Oh, I believe he was given the instructions. There's no reason a banker would completely have an epiphany overnight. Obviously, in November, when he presented his plan, it didn't sit very well with Kathleen Wynne, and it's very clear that that committee was given their marching orders to have a complete 180-degree turnaround in their thinking. That's not an epiphany. That's marching orders.
Same thing happened with the beer, the supposed franchise fee for the beer store became a $100 million beer tax.
Yeah, that would have happened as well. I mean, look, again, the whole discussion on beer, it's talked about being revolutionary. I mean, the fact that in a few years from now, you can go to 150 more grocery stores than you have today and buy a six-pack, limited to a six-pack. And by the way, if you really look at these rules, they can only sell $1 million a year. What do you do in September, October, I guess, when they've already hit their cap? You close that department in the grocery store? I mean, none of this makes any sense. It's all designed to be a distraction from the real issue that was being presented that day. We have a massive debt, a continuing deficit, and they found a way to start to try to get some money for it. I mean, just think of the backdrop Kathleen Wynne stood in front of. Beer in grocery stores. That was the backdrop they chose, not selling Hydro One, not anything about that. It's all about the shiny bauble for the day, and that's really sad.
That was the announcement last week, so what can we expect new? I mean, usually we have some goodies in budget. People, the government will want us to focus on one thing, positive thing. What do you think it could be?
I think it's going to be, they're going to retrot out the beer, the wine, that whole distraction once again. They've got, today the Premier is riding the new transit from the airport. These are the kinds of things. All of that tells me, boy, we really are in for some trouble tomorrow when we see this budget, and we see them trying to explain their way on how they're going to balance. I mean, if you think about it, last year, the year before, the numbers, the guts of the budget document were not NA last year and the year before. They only in the last year show you a revenue and an expense line. All the lines of how to get there are mysteriously missing. We presented that last year. Let's look for those numbers this year. They said they'd be in the fall economic statement. They weren't. There's nothing there. There's nothing of substance. This is, here's how much we think we're getting. Here's how much we think we'll spend. Trust us on all the stuff in the middle.
One of the things that's different about this year is this is the first year for first budget in 4 years that we haven't been in a minority situation. So given that this budget is going to pass, regardless of whether you guys vote for it or not, or the NDP votes for it or not, so what do you fear are they going to kind of put in it that is you think is a bad thing, especially given that they're also 3.5 years away from an election, so something that they put in this budget people will have completely forgotten about by the time.
Spending. They cannot get away from their addiction to spend, and I just can't see how they're going to get. It's not just me, it's the conference board, it's the CFIB, it's the Ontario Chamber. They're on a path, and how they get from that path to that path is what is a mystery. In 24 hours we're going to know how they're going to get there, but we fear greater spending. It's an addiction they have to spend. That's our fear.
They can't spend their way to balance, though. Even they know that.
Well, they've been trying for quite some years to spend their way, and we've seen what's happened. They need to start using their debit card instead of their credit card. Any family knows that. When you're in a hole, the way we're in Ontario, stop digging. Stop using the credit card. You're going to have to pay for it eventually, and now we see this mounting debt. We teased earlier about Claudine's new baby coming into the world, owing, almost $21,000. Think about when Detroit went bankrupt. $27,000 per person is what they hit. That's when they declared bankruptcy.
I know you probably disagree with me, but I mean, to Keith's point, I'm pretty sure the Liberal Party isn't insane. Like they're going to, they're
I'm not sure I'm going to agree with you on that.
They probably they've invested so much in getting to balance at some point that I'm sure they're going to at least make some movement in that direction tomorrow. But I mean, we all know what it's going to be. Like, they're just going to slash spending, right? I mean, they're going to talk about it a lot, but like, that's what they're going to do. So I mean, isn't that, sorry, I don't know what the question is,
Yeah.
but like, isn't that, you know, either A, does that in some ways kind of support what you're calling for, and that they really are probably going to be, you know, cutting a bunch of stuff, even if they don't talk about it much, they really are going to be slashing, you know, to quite an extent, I think. You know, or is it that, you know, you think they're slashing in the wrong areas, I guess?
So I don't.
think their fiscal plan is going to be very much different from yours, I guess.
Well, when you think about it, you're making some presumptions that I'm not going to presume myself. 9.2, 10.5, 10.9. We've all sat here year after year after year saying, wow, they're going to have to stop spending. It's going to happen. It's got to happen this year. They can't keep it up. You know, I genuinely believe they're looking for a Hail Mary pass, and that's not going to come. Look at what happened last year. They put overly optimistic numbers in their revenue, and only 4 months after the budget was voted on and passed, they had to come out with a mea culpa and say, we're off by $500 million. Oops. You know, we forecasted wrong only 4 months earlier, and they had to readjust the revenue downwards by $500 million. When you think about last week, the Bank of Canada came out and told us that we're not going to see the positive growth impact from the lower cost of oil in Ontario. That's what Bank of Canada told us. Now, Kathleen Wynne only a couple weeks ago and said things are going to roll in Ontario because the price of gas is falling. Our revenues are going to go up. Let the good times roll. Well, the Bank of Canada says, no, that's not going to happen in Ontario. We're not going to see the benefit of that revenue. So last year they missed their targets only in 4 months by $500 million because they overstated their revenues. So when you say what surprises, we're going to look very closely at what revenue number they have in there as well. And think about what they did last year in terms of fluffing up the deficit number. Their own 2014 budget, 2013, told us their 2014 budget would be $10.1 billion. Then throughout the year, they fluffed it up to $12.5 billion and patted themselves on the back for coming in at $10.9 billion. They couldn't even make their own fluffed up number, the original fluffed up number of $10.1 billion. That tells us that you know, it's a house of cards.
Maybe if your party wasn't such miserable shape, they could hold them to account and actually make a difference.
Well, that's what I'm doing here today, Richard. We're holding them to account with a 106-page book that I encourage you to read.
You're a one-man band.
No, we've got a great team of almost 30 MPPs. Richard, if you read just the first 4 pages, if that doesn't keep you up tonight and compel you to read the next 10 pages, just read the introduction and read what every expert in Ontario is saying, and then look at what's happening here.
So if I read the rest of it, it'll put me to sleep, is that what
Yeah.
you're saying?
Yeah, either that or it'll cause you a nightmare and you won't sleep.
Your comment on Andre Maran charging more than $200,000 in housing expenses for 4 years from October 2010 to 2014. Does that concern you?
Well, of course it's a concern. He makes a case that he, as an officer of the legislature, has the same privileges as an MPP does, who lives more than 50 kilometers away. So he makes that case that if you don't have that, then you are restricting the pool to either only those who live in Toronto or who will take the job and move to Toronto. So he does make that case.
To pay someone $250,000 and that, gee, you have to move to Toronto, that's too onerous?
No, I'm not saying that. He makes a case. He makes a case for that.
We're hearing this today because the Liberals clearly do not want to reappoint this guy, so they're going to put out everything they can to make him look bad.
I think we're hearing that today because we have a budget coming out tomorrow, and they would rather be talking about absolutely anything. Andre Morin, transit from the airport, beer, anything but the fact that we have a deficit that's gone from 9.2 to 10.5 to 10.9 billion. I genuinely believe that.
This orchestrated smear campaign to get rid of Moran.
I'm not on the committee to hire him. I truly don't know. I truly don't know. It's interesting to note that the hydro sale will remove the ombudsman from hydro, one of the biggest files that the ombudsman has, but we're going to create a beer store ombudsman. Here we are now talking about shiny objects, beer.
Priorities.
Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the book.